Okay, dear participants, let's start our second session. And in this session, we are very honored to invite Professor Ding Yifan to give us a presentation. Mr. Ding now is a researcher at the Institute of World Development under the State Council Development Research Center. And he is a member of the International Economic and Financial Advisory Committee of Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and a member of the Advisory Committee of Ministry of Commerce, members of the expert group on country and area studies, and Ministry of Education. He is also the vice chairman on Chinese Society of World Economy and the executive director of the European Society of China and the vice president of the French chapter. He published dozens monographs about economic globalization, knowledge economy, international financial crisis, democracy paradox, China-EU relations, and the development for new driving force. In addition, he also managed to post more than 100 articles on newspapers and magazines sold across the nation, and dozens of essays written in both English and French on magazines, home and abroad. And in this session, he will talk about the China's development mode. So let's welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for these introductions. So I'm very pleased to talk with you about Chinese development modes this evening. So I will start by introduction of Chinese economy by the COVID pandemic. So I will try to spare some space for the transmission of data. So when the COVID has been discovered as contagious epidemic, China decided to build up two major hospitals with more than 2,500 beds to the future patients of COVID. Within a double of weeks, the hospital has been built and equipped with modern machines and ICUs. The speed with which we have built these two hospitals, it was so astonishing that an American journalist, a monitor at the CBN news channels, just make a joke, saying that he told his audience that in China, in 10 days, they have built a modern hospital, while in China, here in the United States, in America, I tried to install a fiber optic at home, a fiber optic connection at home, and then 10 days passed and nothing happened. So he said that in America, we cannot install a fiber optic at home in 10 days. Well, in 10 days in China, they have built a modern hospital. It shows the effectiveness of Chinese construction. However, the number of patients of COVID completely overwhelmed the medical facilities in Wuhan. So we transformed sport and cultural facilities into temporary hospitals. And we sent also more than 40,000 medical staff all over China to help Wuhan to fight with coronavirus. So all in all, in Wuhan, a city with a population of over 10 million people, with over 10 million people. So all in all, 80,000 people were tested positive. So patient of COVID pandemic. So they have been hospitalized, and more than 2,000 dead because of the COVID. And then as there is some cases that came out from Wuhan. So all in China, we have more than 40,000 people dead because of COVID. So compared with other countries, nothing, because China has a population of over 1 billion and 40,000 million people. But somehow the epidemic has been stopped by the hospitalization of all patients tested positive. China has been the first country who has discovered the new coronavirus and stopped the virus spread by its strong industrial power and organizational forces. So that's how China deal with these. Look at the hospital. That's a picture of the hospital in building. And that's how the hospital once built. And then the internal corridor of the hospital, that's ICUs. And those are ambulances waiting for transporting those patients infected by the coronavirus. Here is visible is a temporary hospital. It's a temporary hospital transformed from a stadium, from sport facilities. So those who are slightly infected are also concentrated in those temporary hospitals in order to stop the virus spread to other populations. Here is Chinese medical staff. Look at their protection. Those people are well protected against the virus. So all in all, we sent more than 40,000 medical staff from all over China to help Wuhan fight with the coronavirus, and none of them has been infected by the virus. It's almost a miracle. Look at what happened in Europe and in the United States. So they are medical staffs, many nurses, doctors have been infected by coronavirus. Some of them dead because of, they have infected, so they dead because of the coronavirus. So that's my introduction, and I would like to show you two figures with that show you Chinese fast economic development. China has had a very fast economic development in recent years. Some numbers are unprecedented. In terms of foreign currency reserve, for example, it takes China only 10 years for its foreign currency reserve to rise from 200 billion US dollars in 2001 to more than 3.24 trillion US dollars in 2012. In other words, if you look at these, in almost 10 years, China's foreign currency reserves have been multiplied by more than 10 times. In 10 years, in 10 times. And then already, the basis 200 billion US dollars already a very, very important foreign currency reserve, while 2 trillion US dollars as foreign currency reserve is obviously is the champion in the world. And the figure is so important that if we classify all these GDP by numbers, by the country's GDP. So the fourth or the fifth largest economy, Germany, is something like that. In terms of economic expansion, in the year 2000, China's GDP is a little bit more than 1 trillion US dollars. The number is $13.8 trillion in 2018, more than 17 trillion US dollars this year. So in other words, in 20 years, China's GDP has been multiplied by 17 times. That's also never seen in this world. Here are some figures that give you a more tangible impression of this evolution. Those are the first 6 economies in the world since the year 2000. The blue is American, the green is Japanese, yellow is Germany, red is Britain, and the pink is France, is French, and the purple is China. So in the year 2000, China is the smallest one of the 6 first economies in the world. Then 5 years later, in the year 2005, China has overtaken France to become the fifth economy. Then, 5 years later, in 2010, China has overtaken those France, Britain, Germany, and Japan to become the second economy in the world within 10 years. Then, 5 years later, in 2015, look at this China's GDP. China's GDP growth is so important. It has overtaken all these economies. It's catching up with that of the United States. Last year, China reached at that level of the United States. This story didn't stop here because this is one aspect of the story. There is another story. Here is another story. Because economists from World Bank and IMF discovered that actually they discovered that the GDP of a certain number of developed countries has been overestimated because of their currency. Those countries that had currency those currencies are often overvalued. Take the case of US dollar. Obviously, the US dollar is overvalued currency. So measure US economy, US GDP by US dollars. So the US economy is obviously overestimated. So to make some real comparison of this economy, those economists from World Bank and IMF, they invented another measurement. Those measurements is called PPP, Purchasing Power Parity. Purchasing Power Parity is a measurement invented by IMF and World Bank. And if we measure the differences of American economy and Chinese economies, the evolution is more astonishing. Here in these figures, the blue is Chinese and the orange is American. Chinese economy against American economy. From the year 2000 to 2017. In the year 2000, even measured by purchasing power parity, Chinese economy is slightly larger than 1/3 of American economy. But since the year 2000, as China's growth is faster than that of the United States, so China is catching up with the United States. It's catching up very rapidly. And in 2014, China have overtaken the United States to become the largest economy in the world. Then that continued, Chinese growth is almost faster than that of the United States. So according to World Bank estimate, last year in 2021, Chinese GDP measured by purchasing power parity is 15 larger than that of the United States. So China's economy size, China's GDP, has overtaken the United States by more than 15%. Well, does those benefits come from? IMF made also some investigation about these, and he made 2 maps that can explain the progress of Chinese in global economy. Here, in the year 2000, the blue parts are closer trading partner with the United States, and red parts are closer trading partner with China. But 20 years later, in 2020, look at this picture. Apart from Canada, Mexico, and all these, the red part becomes the largest part of the world. So they are closer trading partner with China. Here is another version of the same picture from the year 2000 to 2020. And then the share, the American share in global market in the year 2000 is something more than 75%. Look at this, it's more than 75%. But then the share of the United States in global market is shrinking, while the share of Chinese exports, so Chinese in global market share, is rising from less than 25% to almost 73%. That's the evolution of global economy. That's the evolution of those economies. So today we will talk about those subjects. Two phases in reform and opening up, re-globalization with Chinese characteristics, and third part were experiences in China's development. So let's start by the two phases in reform and opening up. Before Chinese leaders decided to engage China into the process of reform and opening up, China spent more than 10 years in a political movement called Cultural Revolution. Cultural Revolution is a massive political movement that lasted for 10 years. So during those Cultural Revolution, China made few progress in economic development because the mass population has been mobilized in the name of revolution, and they wanted to make revolution, such as when you witness Arab Spring and those kind of protest movements in those countries. That also, but that lasted a few days. That didn't last for years. While in China in the 1960s, those kind of political movement lasted for years. So almost for 10 years, China got this kind of the Chinese population has been motivated by this kind of revolutionary emotion. So we didn't got a lot of development, but we got a lot of revolutionary emotion. But at the end of Cultural Revolution in 1976, 1977, so people were a little bit fed up with this kind of revolution. They wanted to change. And then Chinese leaders decided to engage the reform. The reform process engaged, first of all, in countryside. So we call it the rural reform. Rural reform conducted in countryside in 1978. And from 1978 to 1979, in 1 year, Chinese agricultural production doubled. We just dismembered the gigantic structure of agricultural production called People's Commune. During those years of the revolution, we have collectivized all these agricultural production. So individual farmers lost their way of production. They have been reunified into these People's Commune. So those farmers have lost their interest in agricultural production because they have to receive orders from a hierarchical structure. So farmers have completely deprived from the incentives, from their enthusiasm, and so on and so forth. While when we engaged rural reform, we did just liberalize farmers' incentives. We let farmers decide their production and their investment. So the agricultural production have been doubled in 1 year. And from 1979 to 1980, it has doubled again. So all of a sudden, China didn't suffer from a shortage of food. Well, for years, China is living in a shortage economy. China lacks food, lacks textile, lacks clothes. So everything used to be rationed. Everything used to be rationed. The food is rationed, the clothes is rationed, everything is rationed because we didn't have enough industrial production or agricultural production to feed the Chinese population. Chinese population at that time is already very, very, very important because at that time, China had a population over, when the Cultural Revolution started in China, we have more than 600 million people. And then during the Cultural Revolution, and at the end of Cultural Revolution, we have more than 800 million people. So 800 million is already something very important. It's already the biggest country in terms of population world. So we don't have the shortage of food supplies. And then farmers, those enriched farmers, because farmers get wealthier, they wanted to make use of their money. So we allow farmers to create a lot of small and medium-sized enterprises in rural areas. We call these kind of enterprises township enterprises. So there is a lot of township enterprises rising in the 1980s. As those enterprises are very successful, they have taken over the outsourcing work given by those urban enterprises. So that created a win-win situation for the traditional industrial companies and those newly emerged township enterprises. But when we wanted to raise productivity of industry enterprises in cities, the experiment was not so successful because there is some limits in the contract system in industrialization. We didn't realize that it can work so effectively in urban areas. That's why in the 1990s, we decided to engage another reform, this time about the economy system. And then, so in the 1980s, we decided to open Chinese market to foreign investment. Naively, Chinese leaders, they think that by embracing foreign investment in China, we can learn some techniques. We can learn how to run those modern industrial companies from outside investors. So we decided to open Chinese market to foreign. That's the meaning of opening. But unfortunately, in the 1980s, as China just come out of Cultural Revolution, so few foreign companies dare come into Chinese market. They don't understand Chinese revolutionary mode. So not so much companies coming to China. While those overseas Chinese, they realize that if China opens its market, it's a good opportunity. So many overseas Chinese have been the first foreign direct investors in China in the 1980s. But unfortunately, those Chinese were not entrepreneurs, were not, they are conducting some small businesses in Europe, in the United States, or in Hong Kong. But they brought to China some outsourcing works given by those foreign market, by those developed market from European Union and from United States. At that time, those emerging township enterprises absorbed those kind of works, those kind of outsourcing works coming from these Western world with those overseas Chinese. So China started by absorbing those labor-intensive works in China. But those works are garment industries. So by making clothes, by making shoes, and by making toys. That's the style of this light industry in 1980s. So by making shoes, by making clothes, you gain some profits. It's not huge profit, but you still have some profit. So that's township enterprises get wealthier, and they have accumulated some capital to invest in 1990s. And then come the second phase of reform. Coming into the 1990s, Chinese leaders realized that to liberalize people's incentives, you cannot stick to the planned economy development mode. Because since the foundation of People's Republic of China in 1950s, the People's Republic of China has been founded in 1949. So since 1950s, we have introduced a lot of industry enterprises from Soviet Union. We also have introduced their development mode. Their development mode is called planned economy. Everything is planned. The government has the powerful planning capability. So the state at that time, represented by the National Planning Commission, have a power, have a tremendous power over production. National Planning Commission will decide what to do. What will be the investment, in what sector will invest. And everything has been decided by the Chinese government. So there is almost no private economy. So when Chinese come into this state of development, Chinese leaders said that we have to liberalize the incentives of Chinese market to allow people to develop their activities. So he said, we will shift from a planned economy towards market economy. So at the beginning 1990s, we started the transition from a planned economy to a market economy. And then so we have given up the role of the plan in Chinese economy. Although we still have the plan, the plan doesn't play the same role as in the era of planned economy. Nowadays, the plan, economic plan or national development plan, is only a guiding principles. We don't tell people well to how many money to invest or in what sector we have to invest, and so what will be the production and so on and so forth. Is over. So the prices has been liberalized. In the old days, in days of a planned economy, the prices of every merchandise has been decided by those governments. They are not decided by the market. So by the offer and demand equilibrium. No. So China have decided to transit from planned economy towards market economy. But how to regulate a market economy, we don't know how to. We have learned how to manage planned economy, but we don't know how to manage a market economy. So we sent delegations of high-rank officials to Western countries, especially to Western European countries, to France, to Germany, to UK, and also to the United States and Japan to learn how to regulate the market economy. In the 1990s, as there is no WTO yet, so there is no definite rule about cross-border investment. There is only GATT. GATT set some rules for international trade, but we don't have many regulations about international investment. So Chinese government can still decide what to do about foreign investment in China. But in the 1990s, as China wanted to, as more and more foreign companies wanted to invest in China, so Chinese government requests those foreign companies to form a sort of joint venture with Chinese companies and to create a joint venture in China in order to invest in China. So individually, foreign companies at that time in 1990s cannot invest only in China. It's not permitted. And we think that by this way, we can force those foreign companies to share their knowledge, to transfer some of their advanced technology to Chinese counterparts, to these Chinese partners. But afterwards, nowadays, if you look back at those periods of development, this kind of a strategy of opening domestic market in exchange for advanced technology transfer turned out unsuccessful. It's not very successful because no foreign companies wants really to share their technology with Chinese partners. So we didn't get many advanced technology. But the investment of these foreign companies in China by creating those joint ventures had also made very, very positive effect of spillover. They called it spillover effect because some homegrown enterprises in China, they can learn the experience of management, experience of technical operations from those foreign companies in China. So a group of homegrown enterprises such as Huawei, Alibaba, Sinochem, Geely, etc., they have been created in 1980s. They grown up with experience of these foreign companies in China. Once Mr. Ren Zhengfei, the founder of Huawei, has been interviewed by an American journalist, why Huawei made so quick progress, technological progress, and operational progress in China. And Ren Zhengfei said that we have learned all this from Western companies. Especially Huawei has learned its management from Microsoft, because those Western companies has settled down in China. They have created joint ventures with Chinese companies, so we can learn easily from their experience in China. The second part is reglobalization with Chinese characteristics. Then after those years, those years of the development in 1990, from 1990, China have absorbed a lot of foreign investment. This time, like in the 1980s, we have received a lot of investment from overseas Chinese. While in the 1990s, most of these global multinational companies are interested by Chinese market. So they have entered China, they have invested massively in China, especially those automobile industries, for example. Almost every company have built their factories in China. You have from Germany, you have Mercedes, you have Volkswagen, Audi. From France, you have Peugeot, Citroën, you have Renault, From Japan, you have Nissan, Toyota, Honda. From the United States, you have Ford, GM, and so on and so forth. Every automakers have their affiliation in China. Even Tesla have created enterprises in China. And then Korean also have their production in China. They have also invested. Hyundai and Daewoo, they also invested in China massively. All these big companies are starting investing massively in China starting from 1910, from 1990s. Coming into 21st century, China joined WTO in 2001. Then those years that followed China's coming into WTO were marked by a very, very fast economic growth in China. From 2001 to 2010, during those 10 years, Chinese average GDP growth is about 10%. I remember that the peak of these GDP growth is in 2007, I'm sorry, in 2007. In 2007, China's annual growth ratio is about 13%. This fast economic growth has been supported by an even faster export growth. That's the golden age of globalization, the first decades of the 21st century, from 2001 to 2010. So China benefited from the globalization. China's export growth was about 20% every year. Chinese export growth is about 20% every year. That's why China's foreign currency reserve had been multiplied by more than 10 times, from 200 billion US dollars to more than 2.8 trillion US dollars in 10 years. So that never happened in any country, in any moment in history. So, but these kind of fast economic growth supported by export stopped in the year 2008. Financial crisis in 2008 interrupted this kind of growth. Chinese traditional exporting markets used to be the United States or European Union. Alternatively, or biggest exporting markets was either United States or that was the case. Very fast economic growth. Chinese government decided to shift its development mode from an export-led growth to a domestic-focused growth. China's growth was supported by export growth. Starting from 2010, China shifted this growth model led the export to another mode of growth, this time focused on domestic investment. Remember that in 2008, the year of financial crisis, a new international coordination mechanism has born. The international coordination mechanism is called G20. So G20 leaders met twice in 2008 to discuss measures to be taken to prevent the global economy from dragging into a global recession. Eventually, they decided to resort to a stimulus package to prevent a global recession. As China is spared by this financial crisis, and China kept the capital control over its capital market. So China is not infected. China has not been affected really by the financial crisis. China has been affected by the crisis because there is a recession that followed the financial crisis. So China's export has been shrinking very, very fast. There is an export drop starting from 2010. So China decided to shift its economy model from export-led to domestic focus. So China invested a lot into infrastructure construction, and then that relieved China from those pressure of economic growth. China have invested heavily in infrastructures, and that makes a difference with the rest of the world, especially with developing countries. And you will hear a short video later on this. But these massive investments have caused some concerns of Chinese leaders because they witnessed the rise of debt. They witnessed the rise of real debt bubble in China. So they decided to chill down the economic growth. So Chinese economic growth has brought down from 2% every year to 8%, 7%, and then currently to something like 6%. Then we come to the reglobalization with Chinese characteristics. Then China come to the new economic normal, or economy new normal. Economy new normal, it means that contrary to the old normal. The old normal is export-led growth. So the new normal will be domestic focused growth. But domestic focused growth is slower than the export-led growth. So the new normal is characteristic of a moderate growth pace, but we focus on a better quality growth. Then at international level, we have launched Belt and Road Initiative. Belt and Road Initiative focus on improving infrastructure works in different countries. China will reach out to those developing countries to help those countries improve their infrastructure level. That's because China noticed that since the international financial crisis, there is a void of investment in many of different countries. Because during the peak of globalization, many developing countries have received a lot of investment from abroad, especially from Western countries. They used to have those capital inflows coming from those developed countries. Well, after the international financial crisis, all of a sudden, those developed countries withdrew their capital toward their own market. That created a sort of bleeding, a financial bleeding in those developing countries that caused a lot of social riot in many countries. Remember that the Arab Spring happened in 2010. It is no incident that in many African and North African countries, there is some social unrest, social riot, because all of a sudden, the capital inflows stopped, and there is no tourist because of economic recession. There is no capital inflow, there is investment. So China noticed that. China wanted to help those developed countries. China wanted to fulfill the void left by those developing economies. And then China wanted to reach out to help those developing countries to fend off these consequences of economic recession. And then those decisions to increase its investments in developing countries also help China to get out the recession, because China's economic growth was led by its export toward those developing economies. While as these developing economies were all in recession, so there is a shrinking demand from those developing economies. So China went to those developed countries. China created a new market in those developed countries. So that offered a lot of opportunity to Chinese enterprises. So from the crisis, China's investment to trade cooperation with developing world countries increased rapidly. But on the side of developing economies, the globalization, the old globalization is plunged into trouble. Because the old globalization is based upon Washington Consensus, which brought polarization of wealth globally. So that's their way of life. Washington Consensus was worked out by three groups of economists, all based in Washington, D.C. They are economists from World Bank, from IMF, and from US government's treasury bonds. Those three groups of economists had a 2-day conference at the end of 1980s, at the beginning of 1990s. They worked out a prescription of development to developing countries. So it's called Washington Consensus. Washington Consensus is composed of 20 principles. Many of them are common sense, but the key idea of this Washington Consensus is to toss the government intervention aside and to let the market forces dictate the rules of economic development. So that promotes globalization, that lifted the government regulation of the market, so that lead to the globalization. While the globalization has brought more prosperity, more wealth to the world, the wealth and the profit are not fairly redistributed among different countries or among even among different classes of a society. So in the United States, they said that the profit of the globalization went only to a small proportion of population, especially those people that worked in financial sectors. That's why in the United States, people were against the globalization. So there is a movement erupted in the United States in 2010 called Occupy Wall Street. During those movements, Occupy Wall Street, massive people went in streets. They say that only 1% of the population have taken advantage of this globalization, while 99% of people in the United States were victims of the globalization. So they are against the globalization. Well, China wanted to avoid this kind of dichotomy between anti-globalization and globalization. China said, since globalization can bring us more prosperity, we should continue the globalization, but we should avoid the negative side of globalization. So that's why China wanted to make its own version of globalization, and that common prosperity will not be affected by ideology or religion. So that's Chinese idea. Chinese idea is to, since the old version of globalization consists of putting government aside, in this time, we should bring in government into the new globalization process, because government is the public power. Government is public power. Public power is the only actor that can redistribute wealth created by globalization. So we should bring in government. Now, China has used Belt and Road Initiative as the instrument to bring in government. So Chinese government concluded more than 250 agreements with those Belt and Road countries, and to try to make some investment, some common investment sensible in order to promote local development. So China held 2 conferences on Belt and Road and international cooperation in 2017 and 2019. More and more people are interested by Chinese initiatives. So more and more people attended, more and more countries sent their representatives to attend these summit conferences. So that this fully proves the attraction of Chinese mode. So Chinese mode is very attractive. People wanted to come into these to maintain its close cooperation relations with China, because they can take advantage of Chinese fast economic growth, and they can benefit from Chinese investment. They can improve their infrastructure works, because infrastructure works is very, very important. That can improve your population's living standard. Because if a random development can create, nevertheless, a lot of wealth, if the wealth is not fairly redistributed among its population, that will create a lot of distortion, that will create a lot of social disparity. So the social disparity is at the origin of social unrest or social riots. It's not no good. While infrastructures, everyone can benefit from public infrastructures. So if developing countries can improve their infrastructure level, so everyone in your society will benefit from those infrastructures. That's why China is helping a lot of different countries improve the infrastructures. So the most of the population could enjoy your development by this. And so let's come to the experience in Chinese development. In recent years, China made very successful industrialization. So to understand this fast economic growth, you have to understand these fast economic growth comes from the fast industrialization. Without this process of industrialization, China cannot have its fast economic growth. And China cannot benefit from this economic growth. So industrialization is the key to all this success. So for almost 40 years after opening and reform, China has become a very, very complex industrialized country. China's manufacturing goods account as the champion in the world. Here, I just call some of these Chinese. For example, Chinese steel production account for more than half of global production. So Chinese steel production is more than 8 times that of the United States. So in New York City, the New York City wanted to fix their bridges. They wanted to renovate Brinkley Bridge. Brinkley Bridge is a very famous bridge in New York City. Well, you know, to renovate this Brooklyn city, they have imported a lot of steel, special steel from China. And they got some protest from the American Steel Workers Association. Those American Steel Workers Association were protesting against a New York City decision, saying that in the United States, we have such a steel industry that why you import steel from China instead of using American-made steel. Well, the mayor of New York explained to the protesting people that American steel industry doesn't have this kind of capability of these high quality steel. It's over. They don't have this kind of high quality steel. And then there is a question of prices, because in the United States, they cannot produce steel of this quality at that prices, while New York City have a very limited budget for its infrastructure construction. So all in all, those American Steel Worker Association accepted New York City proposal and let the ship go to New York City with Chinese steel. So Chinese steel is very important in the world now. China's cement production accounts for more than 60% of global production. So China produces more than 60% of global cement. China's auto output accounts for more than 1/4 of the global production. So China produces more than 25% of global vehicles. And not only China produces more than 25%. If you make a precise division of these, China produces almost 70% of global new energy vehicles. Of course, in Germany, in the United States, they still produce classic cars, classic vehicles. And they started producing some new energy cars. But all in all, China is producing the biggest part of these renewable energy cars. China is the biggest producer of the renewable energy cars. And then there is, to understand Chinese progress in industrialization, you have to understand that it's simply the subway. It takes 10 to 20 years for China's subway to lead the world. Shanghai currently is #1, and Beijing is #2. London, Paris, New York, all these metropolitan cities, they have put more than 120 years to build the subway network. While in China, we have spent 10 to 20 years to build a very complex network of subway and leading the world. So China made tremendous efforts. China have invested heavily in infrastructures. China has invested in building by far the greatest network of national roads. Every village in China is connected to the network of the national road. So China, not only China built the largest network of national roads, but every village is connected to the national roads. And China had built also the biggest network of high-speed highways. China had built all these highways. And China built the greatest network of high-speed rails. China have built up more than 35,000 kilometers of high-speed railway, which is more than double the rest of the world. It means if you put the high-speed railway of every country together, the high-speed rail from France, from Spain, from European countries, from Japan, from North Korea, South Korea, because that's the only country that have built high-speed railways. The United States doesn't have any high-speed railway yet. So if you put all these countries' high-speed railway together, it makes not half of Chinese network of high-speed railways. So China have built all these airports. Also, China built a lot of airports to connect all the country together, not only in small, medium-sized, not only in big cities, but also in small and medium-sized cities. So every city in China have its own airport. But not only China made so many progress in industry and in infrastructure building, but China is the biggest inventor of the know-how, industrial know-how. China is the world's largest patent application country. China's patent application number surpasses the total of Japan and the United States. Some technologies in China are now leading the world, such as high-speed railways, quantum communications, etc., etc. In those sectors, China is a leading technology. China's industrial output surpasses that of the United States in 2010 and doubles that of the United States now. In 10 years, China's industrial output surpasses that of the United States and doubles the US now. Here are some statistics provided by World Bank. So in 2018, Chinese manufacturing output is larger than that of the United States, Japan, and Germany combined. While the United States, Japan, and Germany are considered as the most important industrial country or manufacturing country in the world. So while China's manufacturing output is larger than all these three economies combined. In terms of agricultural output, Chinese agricultural output in 2018 is almost 5 times that of the United States, while the United States is considered as a big power, as a big agricultural power, while Chinese agricultural output is almost 5 times as important. And China's first homemade aircraft carrier launched in 2017, and in days ahead, in a few days ahead, China is poised to launch its second homemade aircraft carriers. And this time, the second homemade aircraft carriers is so sophisticated, some equipments are the first in the world. China have launched the world's first hack-proof quantum communication satellite in 2016. So in terms of quantum communication and quantum computing, China is rivaling with the United States. Only China and the United States can still producing those kind of sophisticated items. China wanted to participate in the game of those big airplanes manufacturing. In the old days, in the bipolar world, Soviet Union used to be also a producer of big airplanes. With the collapse of Soviet Union, Russia does not produce any big plane today. So there is only 2 manufacturing companies in the world for those big planes. That's Boeing and Airbus. Boeing in the United States, Airbus in Europe. Well, China decided to build up its own manufacturing companies to fabricate those kind of big airplanes. In 2008, China created these airplane manufacturing companies. And then 9 years later, in 2017, China made its first prototype. And then China is continuing to providing as this year, China is delivering its airplane to its customers because China received more than 120 orders from domestic market and from the overseas market. So China started delivering those airplanes this year in 2020. Here, some statistics provided by Bloomberg about the international patents granted to its inventors. Look at China is by far the most important in the world. China's invention license represented more than 49% of global license. So Japan has shrunk. That's from 2010 to 2020. Only China grew so fast, while Japan has reduced. South Korea has some progress, not that much. The US has reduced. European Union have reduced their number of patents. Only China have grown from 16% of the global market to more than 49% of the global market. So in those sectors, China is leading technology in the world. In terms of port equipment, China made tremendous progress. In terms of space stations, China have launched its own space stations this year, and China's space station is still in the building now because it will take some time for Chinese astronauts to completely accomplish the setup of these Chinese space station. Chinese space station will be completely accomplished in 2024, still in 2 years. But currently it's operational. Chinese astronaut can live within Chinese space station. They are trying to improve its setup of this. Supercomputer. China held the world record for supercomputers. China have made 5 supercomputers. They have beaten the world record. So it means that China held 5 world supercomputer world order. Well, that's very recent. Because in 2003, China was unable to produce supercomputers. China wanted to buy a supercomputers from the United States, but you cannot buy such a supercomputer easily. So Chinese government submitted a request to US government, and the US government submitted this request to US Congress. And the US Congress has refused Chinese request, pretending that if the US sells a supercomputer to China, Chinese army may take advantage, may use these supercomputers to improve their weaponries. If one day a US soldier were confronted with Chinese soldiers, and Chinese soldiers have weapons improved by American supercomputers, that would be a national security. That would be an irony for the United States. So they refuse to sell China supercomputer. Well, China decided to make its own. So 3 years later, in 2006, China made its first supercomputer. The China-made supercomputer is so powerful. It has become the fastest and the most powerful supercomputer in the world. it has beaten the world record. It has become champion in the world in 2006. And the story didn't stop there, because China continued to build other supercomputers. In 2008, China made another supercomputer, this time more powerful than the first one. Then in 2012, in 2014, China successively made 5 supercomputers, the one more powerful than these other. So those are world record. China made 5 supercomputers, all world record. China had built a lot of drones, and then China makes a lot of progress in drones. So today, China is the biggest maker of drones. China exports its drones to a lot of countries in the world, especially to the United States, Canada, Nordic countries. Our biggest export market is either in North America or in Nordic European countries, because those countries need Chinese-made drones to supervise their vast territories in the north. Well, Chinese supercomputers, Chinese-made drones are very, very sophisticated. And you know, you might remember that Trump administration have waged a trade war with China. They have waged a trade war with China, and then the U.S. Congress decided to ban a number of Chinese export toward the U.S. market. So China-made drones has been banned by the blacklist of the U.S. Congress. But a few days later, we noticed that China-made drone has been removed from the blacklist. We wanted to know why. So we made an investigation. We noticed that after Chinese made drone had been put onto the blacklist, U.S. Congress received a lot of protests from U.S. Army. The U.S. Army told U.S. Congress that without Chinese-made drones, they cannot conduct their daily operations. So China-made drones is so important for U.S. Army that they went to U.S. Congress to protest. Then the U.S. Congress decided to remove Chinese-made drone out of the list. In space technology and space sciences, we made tremendous progress in recent years. Last year, we have landed a vehicle on the planet Mars. And 2 years ago, we have landed a vehicle on the far side of the moon, on the hidden side of the moon. That's the first time humanity reached this far side of the moon. And then Chinese vehicles have come back and brought back some soil from the moon. So Chinese scientists are working in Chinese laboratories to analyze the components of this moon soil. Those components of the moon soil will tell us how our solar universe have evolved and how our planet Earth and moon has evolved also in the past. So that's something very important. We have made so many space science progress because of this. So and Chinese vehicles is working on planet Mars because planet Mars presents some similarity with planet Earth. So we suspect we suspect that planet Mars may have some life. We don't know. not only China made so many progress in space science and space technology, but we also made a lot of progress in exploring deep oceans. In recent years, China have made 3 of these scientific submarines. Those scientific submarines called detector of deep oceans are very sophisticated. Unlike military submarines, military submarines can only go down several hundred meters under the sea level. If a military submarine goes down more than 1,000 meters under the sea level, it will be crushed by the water pressure. A military submarine cannot resist to the water pressure under 1,000 meters. So the pressure is huge in the deep ocean. Well, those kind of scientific submarine can go down as deeply as more than 10,000 meters under the sea level. So it's very, very deep. Last year, one of these Chinese-made detector of deep ocean have landed twice at the bottom of Ariana Trench. Ariana Trench is considered as the deepest trench on this planet, on the Earth. It means that there is no more deeper oceanic trench than Ariana Trench. Ariana Trench is the deepest oceanic trench on this planet. It's something very important. In a Chinese TV programs, the moderator made a joke, saying that we will ask a question of $100. So if you put down the Himalaya, so the Everest summit, into the South China Sea, into Mariana Trench, do you think that the Himalaya will still have some part emerging in the sea, or will completely submerge by the sea? Nobody knows. Well, the moderator said that it will completely submerge because Himalaya has only an altitude of 8,800 meters above the sea level, while the Ariana Trench is more than 1,000 meters under the sea level. So if you put the Everest summit into Himalaya, into the Ariana Trench, it will completely disappear. It will completely submerge by the sea. And then last year, our detectors of deep ocean have landed twice at the bottom of Ariana Trench. It means in the future, there is no secret for China in the deepest ocean, because China's made scientific submarine can go everywhere on this planet to find the secret, to detect the secret. Here, I prepared a short video for you. You may look at how Chinese astronauts is working to help Chinese space station.
接地会一直在这儿停留。我们窗口就这样这个适配器，这样的话接地可以在这个窗口就能开启。
Look at the Chinese astronaut is rising. most of the time, those robots will work by itself to set up this space station. From time to time, the astronaut will come out to help the robot. So after that, look at this Chinese performance. Out of 10 top bridges in the world, 9 are in China. So we have built those long bridges to cross over a bay. We have built those bridges as long as more than 50 to 60 kilometers long. But we also built a very high bridge, very elevated bridge, very high bridge. And some people, a lot of European amateur of skydiving come to China. They are making parachuting from Chinese bridges. Look at those. And out of 10 top ports in the world, 8 are in China. So most biggest ports are all in China, concentrated in China now. The biggest port is in Shanghai. And all these ports, look at most of these ports are completely automatic. Look at this port. The specialty of this track is that it has no cockpit. It has no cockpit, so there's no driver. It's driverless track. Look at those tracks that are running over port. None of them have a cockpit. So all these tracks are automatic tracks. I visited a automatic port in Shanghai. And then I visited its control tower. An automatic port can transport millions of tons of containers every day. And then it has been controlled over by only by about 20 people. All of them work in the control tower. On the platform, on the platform, at the port, there is nobody, no doctor, no. There is only machines, tracks, elevators. And those people sitting in the control tower, they are manipulate machines with screens, with touches, and just like in a game room. And also China have those big ports. So that makes China the biggest producer of port equipment. China provides more than 80% of global port equipment. If you go to US, you go to Brazil, everywhere in the world, you have China-made port equipment. So in every port in China, you have China-made port equipment. If China had made tremendous progress in infrastructural building, it's because also she had made even greater progress in construction machine making. So you cannot expect that China will make so many progress in infrastructure building with hands, with arms. No, we have those gigantic machines. So look at Chinese highways. We were forced to build highways in the middle of mountains. So look at these. Without gigantic machines, you cannot build highways in mountains. So we have built these. Look at Chinese machines. This machine is called Shell machine. For the same reason, in 2006, China had to import those Shell machines from external market, from European Union or from Japan, because China has the technology. Well, the maintenance of this kind of machine is so expensive. the Chinese decided to build up its own shelled machine. So 2 years later, in 2008, China made its own shelled machine. Then China made a lot of improvement. China improved the technology of those shelled machine. China adds some electronic technology to this machine, and that makes the Chinese-made shelled machines more intelligent. So we have introduced some artificial intelligence into the machines, into this shelled machine. So all in all, nowadays, in 2020, China provided more than 70% of the global shelled machine market. China has become the leading producer of the shelled machine. China provides more than 70% of this world market. And then here is a funny story. A Dutch student is traveling in China. He found the Chinese high-speed train runs so smoothly. He wanted to make a joke. He put a coin on the window, stand by on the window, and then the coin can stand. So he put a second coin. The second coin stand up also. Successively, at the end of the day, he put 4 coins, as all of them stand up on the window of the train while the train is running. It shows that China's railway is really smooth. Here, another short video made by some British and American tourists in China.
We are traveling at 306 kilometers an hour at this very moment. And do we even feel it?
That is on the side, without even,
I think that unless you've been to, like, Japan has a very, very good travel and very good.
Germany and France are not too bad. I think China now has way more than all of those countries put together. You know, they've made that as like a mainstay of their policy to connect all the major cities by high speed, and they're now working on even the sort of smaller cities.
Yeah.
You know, so it's really not difficult to get from A to B at all in China on the train to any major city to another major city. It's pretty easy.
I feel like, and this might be a bit naive, but I feel like there's a lot of the hatred to China is based in jealousy.
Oh yeah.
You know, like China's got all of this stuff and in a very robust transit system. They've got no COVID. They've got a growing GDP. They've got all of these things. So there's instant. We were talking about this earlier, and this is kind of off topic, but there's this kind of like mentality of instead of compete, we're just gonna blame.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Speaking of jealousy, I have my own theory on that. It's kind of like the Western governments want to keep what's really happening in China away from their population scene, because at some point those populations go, well, we've been paying all this tax for all these years.
Yeah.
Where's all the money gone?
Yeah.
Why do we have such shitty infrastructure compared to China, when relatively they, you know, in the timeline, they've only been a rich nation for a very short amount of time, whereas the UK and America have been rich nations for much, much longer, but yet their infrastructure sucks compared to China. So where's all the money gone? Maybe like you were saying earlier, it's all gone on weapons and wars.
Yeah.
You know,
Like I see, like there's a lot of people that say that I hate America, or like, you know, and it's totally not that. I am sad. I am frustrated because America could do all of these things. Could be have all of the great things that China has, but they don't, because there's all this bullshit and red tape, and they can't get their shit, and they're blaming. There's all these blaming things.
So I'm approaching the end of my presentation. So the last, we will try to draw some lessons from the Chinese development experiences. Why can China achieve this industrialization in only dozens of years? China succeeded in achieve this industrialization performance only in 40 years, for example. So here I try to draw some lessons. One is that revolutions have brought public ownership of land, property equality, and education equality. That's something very important, you know. As the land is public property in China, so when Chinese government decided to build highways, to build high-speed railways, so you don't have to negotiate with so many landowners. Well, in India, the situation is totally different, because Indian government wanted also to build a high-speed railway. But the Indian government has to negotiate with a multitude of private landowners, thousands and thousands landowners. And the Indian government spent many, many years to convince those landowners to sell their land to Indian government to build those roads. And then the cost is expensive. It's very expensive. So far, the Indian government has spent more than 10 years to build one high-speed railway. It's not done yet. Education equality, so it's also something very, very important. Because at that time, when People's Republic was founded in 1949, we made the investigation in China, and we found out that only 10% of Chinese population was literate. So 90% of Chinese population was illiterate. China wanted to engage industrialization. You cannot build your industrialization upon such an illiterate population. So China decided to re-enhance its education efforts. So China adopted a national education law, so that forced Chinese families to send their kids to school, because education is granted by Chinese government, free education. But you still have a very important population of adult people. So in 1950s, we have created a lot of night school. So those adult people, illiterate adult people, have to go to night school after their daily jobs. They have to learn. They have to learn to read. So after years of this forceful massive education, in the 1960s, we succeeded in getting Chinese population out of the illiteracy. We made this in the middle of 1960s. We made the same investigation, and that showed that 90% of Chinese population have become literate. They can read. So that's why we can promote education. Those Chinese people can improve their skillfulness by learning, by reading, by those things. That's something very, very important. That's why when China in 1990, when China decided to open this market, all these foreign corporations wanted to invest in China because they can find in China cheap labor forces, but very skillful labor forces. Because talking about cheap laborers, you have cheaper laborers in China's neighboring countries. You have cheaper laborers in Africa, in Latin America. But why those countries cannot attract so many foreign direct investment? Because your cheap labor are not skillful labor forces. While the skillfulness of your labor forces should be out of this equal education. So education is something very, very important. Second lesson, that the marketization should benefit lower classes. China is engaging reform after reform. Those reform is promoting the market share or the market function in the market economy. But in all these, we should pay attention that those reforms should benefit to the lower classes of society. Otherwise, you cannot get people's support for your reform. So that's the third lesson is that in the transition from a planned economy to a market economy, we just avoid to implement the shock therapy. The shock therapy is prescription made by American economies to those transition countries. Some Eastern European countries, and especially Soviet Union, have adopted the shock therapy. Their economy has regressed so much. The economy has plunged into a deep recession, so they never come out of this shock therapy. Well, in China, we avoided those kind of shock therapy. We implemented our policy called incremental reform. The incremental reform has been proven more effective and efficient than their shock therapy, and China got a better result from those transition from planned economy towards a market economy. Fourth lesson, we let all kinds of enterprises to develop in the same time, including private enterprises, foreign companies, collective-owned enterprises, and state-owned enterprises. We think that in the market, the diversity of enterprises property is very important. You should not allow your market to have only one cooperative enterprises. American economies insistently told us that you have to privatize your enterprise to make your enterprise more effective, more efficient, more competitive. We didn't listen to these kind of prescription because we know that in the market you should have a diversity of enterprises because the different enterprises have different functions. So it's like in the forest. We know that in the forest you should grown up the biodiversity. If your forest is composed only of one tree, so your forest will become so vulnerable that an external intruder could easily destroy your forest. While if your forest presented a biodiversity, so your forest will become so resilient, and even an outsiders and outside intruders cannot do anything to your forest. So the market is the same. The market is the same. As Chinese market is composed of diverse enterprises, so Chinese market has become so resilient. So you can resist easily to other external shocks. So that's something very important. Fifth lesson, you have to develop a very competent professional civil servant system. The civil servant system has been created by China 2,000 years ago. If China had remained a unified country, its continent, it remained a unified country in the world, is because we have a very professional civil servants. From time to time, even China has been split, and then they will come back together from time to time. So from dynasty to dynasty, from revolution to revolution, and then in the end, China will be reunited into one country. That because we have these professional civil servant system. That's something very important. All these Western powers, starting from Europeans, they have copied those professional civil systems from China. In 19th century, Britain has discovered this professional civil servant system in China. And Britain has copied this system, and that prevented their representative system from falling into an internal dispute, because they have come out with their representative system. Well, for many, many years, the representative system is called a spoil system, because newly elected people don't know how to run the country. So they will come out with their crony people. So that becomes a crony capitalist country. So nobody knows really how to run a country. So their system is called a spoil system. While in the 19th century, they discovered Chinese system. They copied Chinese system. They introduced a system. They called it a meritocratic system. They called it meritocratic system. They conducted some professional examinations. They created a promotion system within those professional civil servant system, and then Britain has become a hegemon in Europe. And then France and Germany all copied the system. And then the United States is the last one that copied also this professional civil servant system after their civil war in 1865. After 1865, they decided also to implement the principle of civil servant system. They created their own system. 6 lessons: building negotiation and consultation system to replace Western democracies, which is all about party conflicts now, looking at what happened in the United States. So there was such a radicalization of the party's attitude and party position that no compromise could be reached within Congress. So no national policies can work out so easily. So that's a pity. That's a pity. While in China, we have those kind of consultation negotiation system. We call this system consultative democracy. Consultative democracy means that a grassroots society could make their proposal and make their criticism about national policies, and those criticisms, those opinions will rise to the top level, to the national level, and Chinese leaders will take into account those criticisms and those opinions. Then we'll take into account those criticisms into the definition of the 5-year plan. So every 5 years, Chinese government will make a next 5 years development plan. And those criticisms and those opinions will be reflected into this 5-year plan. And seventh lesson is you have to improve your supervision system constantly. So China have in order to promote a very effective anti-corruption system, so you have to try to make your system permanent. So China have created a national supervision system, national supervision commission, whose task is to keep an eye over the behavior of the high-rank official. That's something very important. So no high-rank official dares committed corruption because they are under the surveillance of this National Supervision Commission. Last but not the least, China is well aware that Chinese system is not perfect. Chinese system is not perfect. That's why we want to introduce from time to time some new reform measures to mend those loopholes, to correct those obstacles created by those interest groups. So we know that as our system is not perfect, we wanted to mend this thing, to improve this system from time to time. So unlike Westerners think that their system is perfect one. That's why they call it end of history. They called it end of history. They said that humanities will come all over toward an American model. The American model is the end of history. Well, in China, we didn't believe that. We believe that no man-made political system is perfect. So we wanted to promote reform to improve our system incessantly. that's the end of the story. Okay, thank you very much for your attention. That was I wanted to share with you about Chinese development mode and Chinese development experiences.
Okay, thank you, Professor. Thank you for your
yes.
great presentation. So now let's come to the Q&A section. If you have any questions, you can raise your questions in the chat box, or you can switch on your microphone. So
if you have any comments, your comments are welcome, your questions are welcome. So if you have some questions, if you have some comments, please go on. Do you have any question? Or would you like to make any comment? Your comments, your questions are welcome. Please.
Thank you.
Yes, you are welcome. But I like to read your questions or to receive your comments.
Yes, if you have some comments on China's development, because in the presentation, Professor Ding has shared with us the latest figures, the latest technology and the development of China. So if you have some comments, also you can say something.
So you are muted. Please turn on your mic and ask your question. I feel happy. I will feel happy if you ask me questions. You could input your question into chat box. Just turn on your mic and ask your question, or make your comments, if any other.
Ding 老师，
没有了，那我就算了。
对，没有的话，我们就今天就结束了。
Okay. If you don't have any questions, we will stop here. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for your participation. I feel very happy to share my analysis about Chinese development mode. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Goodbye. So dear participants, that's the end of the second presentation for today. And for Saturday and Sunday, we do not have any arrangements, so you are free and have a nice weekend. Also, you can start preparing the country report, because at the end of the seminar, each country is required to present your country report. You can talk about the conditions in your country and the development of electrification and clean energy, something like that in your presentation. The presentation, the participants from one country, you can work together to prepare one presentation is about 15 minutes. So at the end of the seminar, we will present, each country will present this report to the group. Thank you, and have a nice weekend. We will see you on Monday. Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye bye, Andy. Thank
Bye.
you. Yes.